Hi, my name is Nicholas Lavera, and this is my project presentation for CS 4331. I'll be showing my answer set program that makes a plan for a coffee machine to make a coffee to an agent's wishes. As of now, there are three different choices the agent can make in how they want their coffee, one being the strength, two being the temperature, and the third being the flavor added at the end. More options such as multiple machines or more flavors or adding cream and sugar can easily be implemented, and I will get into that later. In this first file labeled Coffeemakerdomain.asp, it specifies the domain of the project with the actions, fluents, objects, and dynamic causal laws. The objects are listed right here in the highlighted area. Machine, drink, and filter only have one instance for them, but for machine and filter could easily be added multiple machines or different type of filters, and I'll show a little bit of that later as well. But for adding another drink, such as a cappuccino or a tea, would require just everything else more because they're made completely different. And so coffee beans right here, as you can see, are what determine the strength of the coffee. You have weak, medium, and strong. For the water, you can have, it determines the temperature. You can have a cold coffee, kind of just a lukewarm coffee, or a normal hot coffee. And then for syrup is what determines the flavor in it. For these ingredients, especially, well, for the water, coffee filter, and syrup, you can add plenty more. Syrups have different flavors. You could add different temperatures if you want and different types of beans if you want. It was just really easy. You just had to add another instance in their respective category. And I'll show how that works later when you could just add them there. Here are the actions highlighted here. And so they just say what you can do to each of those objects. A coffee machine can be plugged in. The coffee beans can be ground or grinded. You can heat the water, you can place the coffee filter, you can place the coffee beans, you can add the water, and then you can brew the coffee, and then you can syrupify, which I will get into later. Here are all the fluents, and they're pretty straightforward. The coffee machine can be on, the coffee beans can be ground, the water can be heated, the filter can be placed, the coffee beans can be placed, the water can be added, the coffee can be brewed, and the syrup can be flavored. And so now getting into the dynamic causal laws, the first one here is just stating that plugging in a coffee machine causes the machine to be on, which is pretty straightforward. Grinding the coffee beans can cause the beans to be ground. Heating the water causes the water to be heated, but only if the machine is on. So as long as on coffee machine holds, then they can do that. Placing the coffee filter causes the filter to be placed, and so with placing the coffee filter and grinding the beans, they're not really determined on anything because you can really, the way I wrote these is the way I would make my coffee, but as you can see, you don't have to, you can grind the beans first even if you're not ready to put them in yet. It doesn't really matter, but you can't put the beans in as the next rule. Coffee beans can be placed only if the beans are ground and the filter has already been placed. And I'll show that when I show the results, how the CleanGo sometimes plugs in the coffee machine first, or sometimes won't even do that until this next rule, where it says the water can only be added if the beans have been placed and the water has been heated. Since the beans have to have been placed already, with holds placed beans, that comes up from here. By this rule right here, the filter is already placed as well, and the coffee beans are already ground as well. And so then the next rule states that the coffee can only be brewed if the water has been added, and like this rule that I just talked about, since it can't do this until the water has been added, that also implies that the water is heated, the filter is placed, and the coffee beans are ground and also placed in the filter. And the last step after you brew it is the flavor can only be added once the coffee is brewed. And so just like the ones before it, that's always going to happen last because every step before that must take place. And then here are just the normal inertia axioms. Now in the file labeled Coffeemakerexample1.asp, it holds the initial situation and the final goal for this given example. Here is the initial situation is listed here. Nothing holds. The coffee maker will always be off and unplugged. Like it's in your cabinet, you're going to take it out, plug it in, make your cup of coffee. So nothing is in it, it's empty of all ingredients. And then here is the final goal, and it states that at first when I was doing this, in my head, I go, all it has to do is hold what flavor I want, and that will, since that's the last possible thing that can happen, it will always, as long as the rules before it were correct, it would always make a cup of coffee. And it did in the right orders, but I had to add holds the ground and holds the heated, so it knows what type of strength and what temperature the agent wants before it gets to the final phase. And so between here, 2 and 3, I have 3 different examples. On the second one, all you have to do to have a different type of coffee is change what object you want to hold. So for example 2 is French vanilla, weak beans, and hot water. In example 1, it was caramel, strong beans, and cold water. And I will show the results from these in a second. But now in example 3, if you wanted to have 2 types of flavors, you can easily do that. All you have to do is hold flavored with both of the syrups, but then you also have to add an extra time step for that extra flavor to be added. And so the last file is my Coffeemakerplan.asp, and as you can see, it's the exact same as Dr. Watson's in class from his Yale shooting problem, because the coffee maker in my code and his gun work the exact same way, to where you can only do one action at once. You can't grind the coffee beans and add them at the same time. You have to wait for one to finish before you can do the next. And then obviously this just shows what actions occur, so the output is easy to read.
Apologies for that cut. I just realized that the program I was using to record my screen wouldn't let me record my command prompt, which I thought was really weird. It was 3 windows, but download a new one, we're good to go. So now I'm going to run through some examples. In example 1 here, the agent wants a cold, strong coffee with caramel flavoring. So if we go into Klingo and run example 1, the very first thing it does is grind the strong beans, and then it plugs the coffee makers in, places the coffee filter, places the strong beans, heats the water, adds the cold water, brews the coffee, and adds the syrup. And as you can see, like I said, I wrote the rules in the way I would make my coffee. The first thing I'd usually do is take it out of the cabinet, plug it in, but that's not necessary. You can grind the beans and just let them sit there until after the coffee filter is placed. But nothing is done before that would hurt the outcome of the coffee, or even worse, hurt your coffee machine. Don't want a bunch of coffee grinds in it just sitting there. And then the second example, this agent wants a weak hot coffee with French vanilla flavoring. So we can go ahead and run the second example. And like I said, this one, it does a little bit differently, but it's still, the outcome of the coffee is exactly the way we want it. So the first thing it does is plug in the coffee machine, and then it heats the hot water, it grinds the weak beans, it places the coffee filter, and then it places the weak beans, of course, after it's ground and the coffee filter is already in, and then it adds the hot water, brews the coffee, and then adds the French vanilla. And only really differences is kind of the order it did some things, but then if I enumerate them all, some of them will obviously be the same. There's 20 of them. And like the very last thing, this one, the first thing it does is places the coffee filter in first as soon as it comes out of the cabinet, so to speak, which is perfectly fine. Like I said, it won't hurt the outcome of the coffee. It's just personal preference on the way it wants to do it. And then now to the third example, this agent is just a little bit different. He wants a medium coffee, just kind of a lukewarm heated, but he wants 2 flavors, mocha and caramel. And since he wants that second flavor, you have to add that second time step right here. The other 2 only had 8. This should actually be 9. I am sorry, I ran another example, which I'll show in a second. But with 9 time steps here, we can save that and then run example 3 and only want one of those. So this one works perfectly fine as well. Places the coffee filter, plugs in the machine, heats the water, grinds the beans, places the beans, adds the medium water, brews the coffee, and then finally adds the 2 syrups last. And then now if I enumerate all these answers, I believe there should be 40. Yes, there they are. And the only reason there's double the amount is because you have the 2 flavors. It's going to do all of the steps in the way it wants to. And I mean, I'm not going to read through all of these, but they do, I have read through all of them, and they do all end up with a correct cup of coffee. Really, the only difference being the same 20 as the others, but you get 20 more because you can do the mocha first or the caramel first. But at the end of the day, the flavors don't matter because they will just get mixed into the coffee with them. And then now, as I was saying earlier, you can easily add extra coffee beans, water, or syrup, like flavoring, temperature, or strength-wise. So right now, I am going to add a extra example syrup. I really can't think of another one. I just usually like my coffee black, but here we go. So all you have to do is add another syrup object, and I'll just call that example, and then I'm going to go ahead and go back to the third example. And so this person really likes their coffee sweet, so we're going to add another one. All it needs to do is hold that extra flavor at time t with everything else whenever it is finished. So now he wants that medium coffee again with the medium temperature, but he wants mocha, caramel, and whatever the example flavor you want it to be. But now also, since we added the extra flavored here, we need to give it that extra time step. Sorry, that's why that 10 was there a second ago. I've recorded this a couple times. But now if we go and run example 3, I did say that, right? Yes, I did. So run example 3. Boom. Unsatisfiable. Why is that? Did I save this? I did not save this. My bad. Worried me there for a second. There we go. So now if you deal with that, the first thing it wants to do on this one, well, at least with the first answer it gives us, is grinds the coffee, plugs in the machine, places the filter, heats the water, places the beans, adds the water, brews the coffee, and then adds the 3 flavors. And then if you want to see all of them, it'll be a lot more because now you have those 3 flavors to add at the end that you can do in any order because those don't matter. And there you go. Those are those 3 examples. And then also, if you wanted to add another coffee machine, as if you wanted to have this running, like hypothetically, like at a Starbucks or something, and you had multiple coffee machines, you would have to add another machine instance here. And then also in the actions, fluence, and all the dynamic laws that relate to the coffee machine, you would have to change this to a variable instead of just having it with the single instance of it, which isn't too much. It's not too crazy. But then also, whenever you go to the example, you would also have to add a holds for what machine you want. And it'll work fine without an extra time step because regardless of what machine it is, you will always have to plug a machine in. So it won't take any extra time. You would just need an extra hold. And then, like I said, add it to the objects and then change all of these to variables. And that is the same way you could add another coffee filter as well. But if you want to add strength, water, whatever, all you have to do is affect the objects and your final goal and holding that holds, adding the holds, and adding the extra time step. And that is my program for CS 4331. Thank you very much.